All right. Things to look out for in this class. Things that I'm going to ask you over and over and over again. And if you can't get this down, you can't pass. You can't move forward because it's just like the basics. So anytime we're working on fuel injection systems, carburetor, we can just call it carburation systems, which would cover carburetors and fuel injection systems or pressure carbs. Anytime we're working on anything like that with the aircraft, as technicians, we have to be able to do more than just take them off and put them back on. Even if you buy a brand new carburetor, brand new fuel injection system, anything, and you mount it to the aircraft, the very next thing you have to do is set it up. So that's what we're going to be looking for. How do you set them up? The Rotax class I was just at, that's, one of the things we spent like an entire half a day on is it has, unless it's the fuel injected version, it's the carbureted version. They have two carburetors. You got to sync the carburetors. If you don't understand the carburetor, what it's doing, then you can't sync them. You have to have some basic knowledge here of what to expect, what the engine's going to tell you, what you're going to see on the instrumentation. So keep watching that. Keep, okay, what is it going to do? And we talk about instrumentation. You do have to understand that aircraft are always going to be set up one of two different ways. It's either going to have a fixed pitch propeller or it's going to have a constant speed propeller. So anything that has a fixed pitch propeller, you've only got two knobs, which are?
Fuel and throttle.
Yes, fuel and throttle, or more specifically, throttle and mixture is what we call it. No, you did good. So I had to follow you there. So you're always going to have the two knobs, right, that the pilot can work with. And when we're talking strictly about the throttle, as you move the throttle back and forth, the only instrument that's going to be provided to that aircraft is going to be a tachometer. We don't put a manifold pressure gauge in an aircraft like that because there's nothing you can do about it. It just is. But as mechanics, we have to understand what the manifold pressure would look like as we're operating the engine. It's something that you have to keep in your mind, what it's doing. Because if you can't understand those things, then a lot of it just won't make sense. Like in the Rotax, you set it up according to manifold pressure. There's no manifold pressure gauges, so that's what you do. You install manifold pressure gauges and you set it up because manifold pressure actually tells you a lot. But in a fixed pitch prop, you just don't put it in there because there's nothing you can do about it. In a constant speed propeller, you're actually flying it and adjusting the engine as a pilot, both RPM and manifold. So, as a review, in a constant speed propellered engine, as I take off, I'm going to have the RPM, which is usually the blue knob, all the way forward, which is high RPM. So the prop is flat. And of course, we'll do props in the next 4 weeks, but it's reasonably flat, so it allows it to go to high RPM. So, and I put the throttle all the way in. So everything is firewall, all the way forward, max. Okay, that RPM is going to go right up to red line, right? And the thing that's keeping it from going past red line is the propeller governor, which we'll get into, that's just set by a mechanic, right? It's not hard. You just go out there and put your feet on the brakes, mash everything forward, look over the RPM, and if it goes past red line, shut it down, adjust a little screw on the governor, try it again. If it's not too much, adjust again. So, all right. So we take off, everything's mashed forward, right? Now, in my aircraft, all of them, I have a manifold pressure gauge. It has a green arc. And as I take off and I look over, my manifold is on the other side of the green arc. It's towards red line. There's no red line because you don't red line a manifold unless you have a turbocharger. So it is what you get. So it's all the way over close to atmospheric pressure because that's what it's going to read. All right. And so I take off, and what is my RPM at? Red line. For me, it's 2,400. And my manifold pressure is maxed out, which is going to be a little less than atmospheric, close to an inch less than atmospheric, because the throttle plate's all the way open, and that's all I'm controlling. And the atmospheric's coming in there, so I take off, and I get to about 1,000 feet. I reach over, and I pull back the throttle. What's going to happen? Now I'm going to pull it back, not to just pull it back a little bit. my manifold pressure is going to come down because the throttle plate closed. What's my RPM do?
Should stay the same.
It's going to stay the same because it's a constant speed prop. And I've told it I want 2400. Now, if I keep pulling it back to idle, everything's going to drop, right? You can't keep 2400 RPM at it. You know, if I could, that'd be great. So, all right, so pull back on the throttle. The manifold pressure is going to pull it up into the green. All right, and then as I start climbing and climbing and climbing, what's my RPM going to do? I'm going to go to 12,000 feet. What's my RPM going to do?
Stay the same.
RPM is going to stay the same all the way to
12,000 feet.
12,000 and beyond, because that's what I told it I want. All right, manifold pressure as I'm climbing, and I'm not touching anything. Got my autopilot on, my new autopilot, just climbing out. What's my manifold pressure going to do as I'm climbing?
Get less.
It's going to drop more and more and more because the atmosphere around us is dropping more and more and more. Right? So as the pilot, what I'm going to do, well, what does that mean to horsepower?
It's going to drop.
Right, plank, that's pressure, it's going to drop. So I'm going to add more throttle. What's my RPM do? Stays the same. And what's my manifold pressure do? Climbs back up where I want it. All right, so we're going to do all that until we get up to some point where it's not, I don't know, I'm at 8,000 feet or so. I'll reach over to push my manifold pressure in, and it's all the way in now. So that's just all you get. You keep going up, and then manifold keeps dropping down. Get up to where I want to cruise, level off, pull back the blue knob. What's my RPM do? Blue knob. So I've leveled off, 12,000.
Should go back
My
to
manifold,
your
my
greener.
throttle is all the way in because the atmosphere is really low at that point. And so with it all the way in, the needle's on the low green. So all right, so then I pull back the blue knob, which controls what? The prop slash RPM. So I pull back on the blue knob. What's my RPM do? It's going to drop where I want it. I'm going to adjust with that. What's my manifold pressure do?
Stays the same.
It's going to go up. I'm slowing the engine down. So if I'm slowing the engine down by a couple hundred RPM, there's more time for the air to get into the manifold. It's taking a long, if you slowed it way down, thought about it, you're pulling the syringe back, but you're doing it real slow, if we slow everything down. So the manifold's going to come up a little tiny bit just because it's not pulling as fast on the manifold. So it'll come up a little tiny bit. So I want to think about that. And I'm going to cover this again, but I want you to really kind of picture it. And now let's go all the way back to a fixed pitch propeller. And I want to think about the fact, we say manifold pressure because that's how we talk in aviation, but it's a vacuum. So the manifold is everything from the throttle plate to the cylinder. And so I start up the engine and I'm idling it. And we'll say fixed pitch, make it nice and easy. It's a fixed pitch prop. And I'm idling the engine. And between the throttle plate and the cylinders, that's the manifold. Manifold pressure is going to be, high would be, see, this is where it gets confusing. And high manifold pressure, if I said high, it means it's closer to atmospheric. It is high, but it's a high vacuum. It's a high vacuum. I knew you knew that. So it's a vacuum. It literally is a vacuum. So in that manifold pressure, we say we have low manifold pressure, but it's a high vacuum. Right? So that gets very confusing.
So if it's low manifold, then it's a high vacuum.
Yes.
What if it's high manifold?
Then it's a low vacuum.
Then it's low vacuum.
It's getting very close to atmospheric.
You just said the other way.
Did I? Okay. So if it's a low manifold pressure,
Okay.
it's high vacuum.
Gotcha.
If it's a high manifold,
Low vacuum.
Low vacuum.
low vacuum. So when I start up the engine and I'm running it in an idle, I have what kind of manifold pressure?
Low.
Low manifold pressure. There's a big old suction on there. Those pistons are trying to come back, and there's a big restriction with only a teeny tiny little hole, and these big old pistons are pulling back on it, and it's not getting anything. It's getting a little tiny bit of air and fuel coming through there. And so in that pipe, you have this massive amount of suction, which, by the way, that's where manifold leaks really show up, because you have this huge suction. It's sucking against everything it can, and if you've got a little pinhole leak, it'll suck it right in like that. So, but the funny thing about that is, so if I have this massive amount of suction, low manifold pressure. And I don't touch anything on the controls, but I don't touch the throttle, but you can do this as a pilot. And I reach over and I start pulling the mixture out. I'm at an idle. And I'm going to cover this all again, but I want you to know where we're going with this. And I reach over and I pull back on the mixture. A little bit, little bit, little bit, little bit. And the engine was kind of running rough. Now it's running a little bit better and a little bit better. Right? That means if I'm pulling the mixture out, it means it was running really rich. And now it's not running rich. It's like really happy. Rich means too much fuel to the air. Now it's really happy. Now you can feel it get better. You can actually see if there was a manifold pressure gauge, that manifold pressure gauge moving, because the engine's running better. You can even see the RPM start to go up. So if the RPM goes up and the throttle never changed, and the engine sped up a little bit, well, what does that do to the vacuum? Does it make it more vacuum or less vacuum? Well, the engine's running better and faster, but you haven't changed the restriction. More vacuum. Got that? And the reason why I'm bringing this up right now is because one of the projects you're going to be doing is you're going to be setting up 2 carburetors on a test stand, and I want you to know what you're looking at. Because it's got a manifold pressure gauge that's very sensitive and an RPM gauge that kind of bounces around. And you can actually watch that manifold pressure gauge. You can set your carburetor up, not change any of the throttle settings, and mess with the mixture, and you'll see it run faster and faster and faster. And as it starts running faster and the throttle never changes and there's more suction against that, you should see the manifold pressure dropping, getting less, more of a vacuum. And so I want you to understand that. And the other thing that we're always going to talk about it doesn't matter what the system is, you have to be able to set up idle speed and idle mixture. They always give us those settings on carburetors. Idle speed, idle mixture. So if nothing else, every time you look at something, you better know. Kevin's going to ask me exactly how do you change idle speed and set idle mixture. How do you set it? And I will get very specific with you. Specifically, how do you do it? And I'm looking for, it is this screw right here. I'm going to adjust this screw in until it does this, and then back it out until it does that. Got it? All right. Let's talk about this stuff. Let me see. Slideshow. From beginning. Here we go. 8 more weeks. That's not what I wanted. I want that. You scared yet?
Yeah. Do I have to go?
You're worrying me. All right. If you've got a car or one of those nice new electronic injected Rotax engines, you don't have to worry about much of this thing. They got one lever. Everything kind of happens all on its own, but we have our legacy aircraft. And they don't. Plus, we have to understand what's happening as we do stuff. So I think a lot of this is going to be review for you, because you already had this. Thanks. There. Talk about the A+. Atmosphere. Whoa. What am I doing here? A-T-M-O-S. Atmosphere. What?
So it's spelling car.
It is. Pity the guy that can only spell a word one way anyway. All right, atmosphere. Oh, I might as well write it twice here. All right, so the specific atmosphere. The atmosphere. Well, what about it? You should already know this stuff. A standard day.
Oh, good.
Standard day is what?
29.92 inches of mercury.
29.92 inches of mercury. What the hell does that mean, inches of mercury?
We got a little mercury gauge that would read 29.92 inches.
How's that work?
As compared to a vacuum.
Huh?
As compared to a vacuum.
As compared to a vacuum, what the hell is 29.92 inches of mercury? Well, by the way, that's also about 1 inch. That's 1 inch of mercury, which would be Hg. Mercury, Hg, is about 13.6 inches of water. So that's roughly, in really rough terms, about a foot. So 29.92 inches of mercury, if you want to do really easy math, and just say, well, how many feet of water would that be?
30.
Roughly 30.
Roughly 30. So as the story goes, and I believe this is actually Pascal, he took a column of water in a dish. So if we take a dog dish and a column of water, 30 feet, we got to put a cap on the end. That's 30 feet up there. And we filled this thing full, we took it down to the, because Pascal's an old guy. So you take 30 feet of, bamboo, you had to have a clear tube. And he takes it down to the river and he puts it in there and puts a cap on it. Right, so now he's got a capped 30 feet of water. Take it back to his house and takes it down and he puts it in the bucket. Gets it down there and he pulls the cork out real quick so that the opening's here. That's that way. The water's going to fall out of that thing to a certain point. You can't have a vacuum there. You got to have that all the way down. So put that like that. That's going to be down there. All right, the water's going to fall out and leave some space up here. This will be under a vacuum up here. And between here and here, how much would that be about? Oh, about 30 feet. Follow?
Yeah.
All right. So as the story goes, so Pascal, he did this, scientist and all, and he's got this 30-foot column. Well, he had a problem, and he couldn't get the 30-foot column, of course, into his house, so he had to cut a hole in his roof. It's a true story. Had to cut a hole in his roof, and there we go. Let's make that like that, so because my roof is off. So he had to cut a hole in his roof there. And what happens when the storms come in? What does the pressure, atmospheric pressure do? Drops. So drops down, say 29 inches. So what's that water column do when a storm's coming? You guys with me on this?
There's
Sure.
more pressure in the tube than the outside, so it goes up.
No, they say the barometer's falling, right? So in a storm, so a standard day is 29.92. Well, a storm's coming. What's the barometer going to do?
Go down.
Down. So give me a number. 28?
28.
All right, 28. So that means then the column of water is how much?
28 feet.
From the bottom to this break right here where this water is. Right there. That's the break of the water. Storm's coming. What's that water level do? Go up or down?
Yeah.
See, because the atmosphere is pressing down right here on this. All this water that's in the opening right there. And so when a storm's coming, the atmosphere around us decreases. So there's less pressure on that water. Right? And so what happens to the water in the column?
Go down.
So I guess we're confused on the top. Is you said it's a vacuum, so that means it's capped off.
It's capped off up
Okay,
there.
there you go.
Yeah, see, I got the cap up there, right there. Here's the cap. So less pressure here because the storm's coming. So that means this water level is going to
Go down.
Go down.
go down. And then sunny days are coming. High pressure moves in. What happens?
Water goes up.
Right? So now we have more pressure here. This is going to go
Back up.
back up. There you go. Basic barometer. Well, problem is, he's down here. That's Pascal. He was kind of looking way up there, and he couldn't see that water very well. So what he did is he got a little rubber ducky in there, little chicken, and so he could see the water level. Well, the problem is his roof was right there about 30 feet, so every time a storm would come, what would the chicken do?
Drop down.
drop down, come inside the house. And every time that it was going to be nice out, what'd the chicken do? Go back outside. Say, burn him at the stake as a witch. I don't know if that part's true. It might have been. I don't know. So, anyway, Pascal invented that. And I don't know. You can look up what happened to Pascal. So I tell you that story to hopefully you remember that. All right, standard date, 29.92 inches of mercury. What else do we know? How many PSI is that? Okay, we'll call it 14.7. We'll round a little bit. PSI. Okay, I guarantee you this is going to be in your oral practical test, and it's going to be in your written tests. This is something you want to commit to memory. So 29.92 inches, 14.7 PSI. PSI, absolute, correct, not G because it'd be zero. What else we got?
1 atmosphere.
Yeah, I'm not going to hold you to that one. Temperature,
59 degrees.
59 degrees F or 15 C. That is the 1 Celsius thing that I love because I just took my writtens for my instrument. And let me tell you, every third question dealt with that, it seemed like. Because you have a lapse rate in aviation where it gets 2 degrees Celsius colder for every 1,000 feet. So on a standard day, it's 15 degrees. Right here, right now, on a standard day, if I go up 10,000 feet, what's the temperature?
At 10.
No.
2 degrees per. So if I go up 10,000 feet, how many degrees Celsius colder did you just get?
20 degrees Celsius. Negative 5.
It'd be negative 5. It's 20 degrees Celsius colder. And it started at 15, so we're going to go minus 20, be negative 5. Be negative 5 degrees C at 10,000 feet on a standard day. All right. Take. Anything else? Oh, I don't know about humidity. Oh, yeah. Okay, humidity, perfectly dry. Where? Sea level where?
At the airport.
At the airport. Ah. Gotcha on that one. Let's see. Right there. At 40 degrees north latitude. So that perfectly dry. At 40 degrees north latitude. I'm not going to probably ask you that, but it's like, where is 40 degrees north latitude? Well, it's slightly north of San Francisco. So where do you suppose we are? Right about there. So we're living in the standard atmospheric zone. You know, you go down to Miami below 30, and it's like, well, they can't have a standard day because they don't live in the 40. So, sucks for them. All right, perfectly dry. Let's see. We are going to... What's going on? We're going to eventually talk a lot about turbochargers in this class, so we have to understand what happens with our altitude. So an increase in altitude, so as we go up, and increase in altitude causes, what happens as we go up? What about the pressure around us, that 29.92? What happens to that? All right, we have a decrease in pressure. What does that do to horsepower? Going to go up or down? That's why we turbocharge. Try and get that back. What is my decrease in pressure? About the lapse rate is 1 inch. 1 inch of mercury per 1,000 feet. So, right, so back in our constant speed propellered airplane that's non-turbocharged, we take off at sea. I get in the airplane, and before I even start it up, I look over at my manifold pressure gauge on a standard day. And what is my manifold pressure gauge going to read? The engine's not running, the batteries are off.
About 15. Depends on the
Depends on your gauge.
barometric pressure that day.
Is it-
Standard day.
Standard at 29.92. What should read?
What? It's a standard day. A manifold pressure gauge. What's my manifold pressure gauge read? Reads inches of mercury. So, yeah. Oh, yes.
29.92.
It should read right about 30 inches. Airplane is off. It's not running. I get in. I sit down. I look at the manifold pressure gauge. Ah, damn thing's broken. Airplane's not even running. It already says 30. Why does it say 30?
It's a standard day.
Because that's what the atmospheric pressure is inside the manifold pressure. It is what is around us. It's a great way to find out if your manifold pressure gauge works. All right, we can go back and look at this. This is a funny clock. What time is it?
Huh.
940
It's
feet.
940.
It's 940 o'clock. All right, that's an altimeter. So the little hand reads hundreds, big hand reads 10,000. So it's almost at 10,000, and it's coming up at 9, 20, 40, 60, 80. That'd be 10,000 feet, so 940.
It's almost at 1,000. What's this?
Oh, I'm sorry. Jeez, I screwed that up. I'm not really a pilot. Almost at 1,000 because this is a 10,000. So almost at 1,000. But this is called a Colesman window. Have you guys been introduced to this yet? All right. So in the airplane as a pilot, you have this little adjustment wheel because the atmospheric pressure changes all the time, right? And I'm here at this airport, which is 75 feet, and I want it to say 75 feet when I'm here. I don't want it to say I'm at 300 feet when I'm sitting here. Let's just say we're at some airport right up there. I don't know, Calaveras or something. Nah, it's still too low. And my airport elevation is 940 feet. And so I call up, I listen to the automated weather service, and they say current pressure is 29.91 inches. If you look at this right here, it's at 29.9, and right between that and the next one, so that means it's 29.91. So I dial it into 29.91, and it says I'm at 940 feet, and I get out my my airport directory, and I go, oh, what elevations am I supposed to be? Well, look at that, it's 940 feet, so the two match. Follow? All right. I guess I tell you that to tell you the opposite is true. As a mechanic, you get in somebody's airplane, and you're at 940 feet, or whatever altitude, and you know the altitude because you're a mechanic and you're working at the field and you always know your own base, and you go, well, right here it's 75 feet. So I turn this little knob down here. This little knob down here turns this window back and forth, and that changes this so that it's accurate, right? And when you're flying along as a pilot going from here to there, the controller will call and tell you, doing a long cross country, and you took off and it's 29.91, and I'm going down to LA, and halfway there, let's say, oh, and current altimeter at Bakersfield is 29.96. Well, I got to adjust it 29.96 and then adjust my altitude accordingly. But anyway, not to get too much off from that. As a mechanic, I'm here, I'm working, I get in the airplane, it's off, I can adjust that little window, adjust that little knob until those arrows right there says I'm at 75 feet, because we're at 75 feet here. And if I say we're at 75 feet and I look over at this and it says 29.6, what's my manifold pressure going to read?
29.6.
It should read about 29.96, right? So manifold pressure gauge reads outside. All right, so I do that. I get in the airplane. Manifold pressure is saying it's not that accurate, so it's going to be close to 29, 30. So right about 30, 29.92, close to 30. And I start up the engine. What's manifold pressure going to do?
Drop.
Go major suction. So it's not pressure. It goes less than pressure, so it's going to drop a whole lot because I'm idling, right? I run it up, it's going to come up when I increase throttle. I take off, and as I take off, wide open throttle, what's my manifold pressure going to be?
Close to.
Close gas.
Yeah, close to.
Close to about an inch less because there's some restrictions in the pipes and stuff. So it's just 30, we look at 29. And I'm just going to leave it right there, and I'm going to climb up to 10,000 feet. And as I'm climbing, I pass one, so it's 30 inches here. When I get to 1,000 feet, my manifold pressure is going to be about,
29.
what's the trick question? Started it up, went to 30. 30 is atmospheric, so when we go wide open throttle on the ground, we're going to lose an inch, so it's 29.
Yeah.
On takeoff, go up 1,000, it's going to be 28. Up another 1,000,
27.
another 1,000. It's easy math. All right, let me see. Yeah. So that's why we have a turbocharger. And every time we drop that manifold pressure, we lose power. If you have a turbocharger, we can get it back. Talk about that later. So an increase in altitude, decrease in pressure. Let me see. Decreases temperature. Oh, pressure. We also have a decrease in temperature. Obviously, it's going to get colder. Decrease in temp. Is that good or bad for horsepower?
Good.
That's good. That's really good. And I already told you that's 2 degrees Celsius per 1,000. About 3.5 Fahrenheit. 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit per 1,000. Let's do that. Let me see. Effectiveness or density of air. Density of air is reduced basically when, all right, so air is not equal. If I want to go flying, I want to go flying on a day like today. It's cool, crisp air out there. You guys probably have ATIS on your phones, huh? I do. So we have the automated weather. It's not ATIS. I guess it's Automated Weather Observation Service, AWOS. So you can call them up on your phone, or you always listen to the automated weather service here at the air before you take off. They'll tell you the winds and all that. And here, I like here because they always give you the density altitude. So we're at 75 feet. And on a really cold day, a day that is maybe colder than 59 degrees out, they'll tell you my density altitude is less than 75 feet. You follow? They might say density altitude is 10 feet. On a really hot day in the middle of summer, it's really common to hear density altitude, 3,000 feet. So all air is not the same. And what they're telling me with density altitude is that's what your airplane's going to think it's at. It's going to think it's at 3,000 feet. It's going to perform like that because the air is really hot, so the molecules are further apart. What's that?
It's
Thinned out. So in all things being equal, the prop's not going to be as effective, the wings aren't as effective, and more importantly, the engine is not as effective. So air is not all the same. So we have density air, the density or the quality of the air we're looking for the engine. So what we're talking about is reduced when, so we got a couple of things. We got 1, 2, 3 things are going to make the air worse. They are, see if you can, temperature. Okay, so we'll put that one. As temperature does what? Okay, anytime the air temp goes up, that's bad. Now think about that. Lycoming, they like to run their air through the bottom of the oil sump, and the air is going to get hotter or colder? Hotter. Is that good or bad? From a design standpoint, it's not good. There's some trade-offs for that. It's going to cool the oil a little bit, and it also, a lot of people said, helps with the mixture of the air and the fuel. All right, that's as. Density air is reduced as temp increases. What else we got?
Altitude.
As altitude,
Increases.
altitude increases. Which is the same thing as saying pressure decreases. Pressure decreases. All right, and let's see. I got one other thing on here, a little more obscure. Humidity. Humidity increases or decreases?
Increases.
Decreases performance with higher humidity.
Say it again.
Decreases performance with higher humidity.
So the effectiveness, the density of our air is reduced when the humidity is increases. Because we're burning water instead of air. Although we're going to talk about water injection, which is a good thing, but don't confuse that. All right, the different kinds of altitudes. And then we'll break off this one. I don't want to get all piloty stuff on you, but there's different. You're in aviation, you got to know these things. Actual altitude. Well, our actual altitude here is how far above we are above sea level. So measured distance above sea level. All right. Yeah, some of this is a little more pilot stuff. AGL, above ground level. So that's how far you're going to fall if you don't set up the engine correctly. So above, so that's measured distance above the ground. All right. More mechanic-y stuff. Pressure altitude. I guess not. This is really a piloty thing, man. I think ask that over and over again on that instrument test. Pressure altitude. Make this really simple. It is the altitude. The altitude read on the altimeter. When the window is set to 29.92. So it doesn't matter anything else. Get in the airplane, rotate that little Colesman window to 29.92, read what's on the thing, that's pressure altitude. I call that pressure altitude. And so anything up to 18,000 feet, as pilots, we actually set it for the correct barometric pressure. We call it the guy with the chicken in the roof and ask him where the chicken is. They tell us, and we set that so we get as accurate as we can to sea level. But then once you break 18,000 feet, you take your thing, you turn it to 29.92, and that's what you get. Which is kind of weird because you could be right at 18 and go below it. But anyway, so pressure altitude. And that's somewhat important as a mechanic because you want to reference standard day a little bit, you know. And then more importantly, I think this is the big one, is density altitude. Which is, again, what the airplane really feels. It's taking everything into consideration. What's the barometric pressure? What's the humidity? What's the temperature? I was going to say we got really low pressure with high temperature and high humidity. That density altitude is going way up. So, like I said, you can, when you pull up the weather automated weather service here and have the recording and it says density. In fact, you go up to, I don't think they say it here. They say it here, caution? I don't think they do. Now, but you go to like Columbia or something, which is just right up here in the mountains, where it's kind of a tricky takeoff. They'll do that. Caution, density altitude is, and they'll give you a number, and it's a pretty high number. You're like, whoa. So density altitude is.
I've been to an airport that actually had a board, a lit board that said density altitude, and it gave you a number. I
Interesting.
don't remember where that was. But
I think I might have seen that once or twice. I forgot about that. And why is that important? Because it shouldn't be, but you take a 172. How many seats are in 172? 4. Yeah, so me and Alan and these guys over here, we'd all fit. I'm trying to figure out some big guys. We'd all fit,
That's a lot of weight.
but we'd all fit.
Sure. That's a lot of weight.
You're up there.
So we go out there and we take off from here, all 4 of us, and we got 10,000 feet. We'll take off. It's climbing kind of slow. Yeah. We're going to go up to Columbia and get some ice cream. So we,
We walk it home.
well, unfortunately, you know how people figure out most of the time that it's not working is when they're in the trees at the end of the runway. And like, yeah, and that happens far too often. So that's that density out. Well, we were able to take off here. What happened over there? Well, we walked into town. It got hot. We got the ice cream, and we came back, and we were already at a higher altitude, but that density altitude went way up. So we were losing performance out of the engine, out of the wings. I had a customer. He had a Funk. You guys know what a Funk is? It's a ragwing, tube and wood aircraft, and I hated working on them because number one, the wings are kind of low. It's kind of a low sitting high wing airplane, and like a Cessna has one strut that goes like to one point. And if you have a ragwing Cessna, it's got like one point on the fuselage, and it has a double strut that comes out, Cubs, all that. This stupid thing had a strut in the front and a strut in the back. So every time you work on, no matter which way you came around the wing, you had to duck under the wing, under a strut, get in the airplane, then under the strut, under the strut. So you're constantly ducking around that thing. But anyway, I had a customer who went to like Oshkosh or Sun and Fun, and he was a large man. I mean, he was already big, but he was like 6 something. He was taller than I. He was coming back after Oshkosh, had another very large man with him, and 2 weeks worth of camping gear, and a tired 85 horsepower engine. And they took off from New Mexico, and as he was explaining it to me, so he survived. As you know, I mean, they take off, and it's like, okay, we're like, maintaining, and then the terrain kind of started coming up, and so, he's pulling up. Then they got to a plateau. And he pulled up to go to the plateau, and it stalled, and it came down on one wing. And his words, I turned that wing into nothing but a bag of sticks. Because it was all wood and fabric, and it was. He just put a zip tie on it, and there you go, it's a bag of sticks. They both survived the crash, but the passenger, I don't think he ever made it out of the hospital. It was kind of the demise of him. So, yeah, density altitude.
Trucking Tahoe has one of those automated signs.
Oh, okay. I've never flown in there. I've always been afraid of the density altitude. Let me see. Let's say that's pressure, altitude, corrected for, non-standard temp. And I just prefer to say it like this. What the airplane engine feels. What the airplane feels based on temp, pressure, and humidity. So as air density, it's out here. So as air density is reduced, so is power. You lose air density, you lose power. For every 10 degrees, for every 10 degrees Fahrenheit increase over standard day, the engine will lose about 1%. So, considering standard day is 59, so call it 60, 80 degrees out, So how many degrees off? Huh? 30? 30. So we've lost
About
3%.
3%.
I'm gonna bring my calculator. So I have a 0200 with 100 horse. Best case, we've just lost 3 horsepower then. So we're down to 97. Go to 100 degree day. That's 40. No, 80. Where were we at? Oh, 60 to 140. Yeah,
Yeah.
40. So we lost 4%. So it starts adding up. And that's just temp. So, all right. Let's take a break.